The desert stretched endlessly, a monochrome sea of sand undulating beneath the blistering North African sun. Shadows from jagged outcrops cut sharp lines across the dunes, shifting slowly as the day advanced. From his concealed position behind a low ridge, the sniper observed with methodical attention, cataloging the subtle cues the terrain offered. He adjusted the strap of his rifle case, keeping movements minimal, his eyes scanning the horizon where thin trails of dust marked the approach of vehicles far off in the distance. Axis supply convoys followed predictable routes, but his trained eye noted every deviation. A faint shimmer along the horizon suggested heat distortion. A slight waver in the dust trail indicated the convoy's speed fluctuating with soft sand ridges. He recorded these in a mental ledger, noting time, angle, and estimated number of vehicles. Exhaust plumes rose in irregular patterns, curling above the engines and dissipating into the sun's glare, each one a clue to engine type, load, and pace. The sniper's concealment relied on the natural undulations of the dunes and scattered rocky outcrops. He measured sidelines, accounting for the sun's ascent and how shadows would stretch across depressions in the sand. A single miscalculation could expose him to distant scouts or reconnaissance aircraft. Every action, breathing, adjusting position, scanning binoculars, was done with precision. The slightest tremor in the sand could carry sound further than expected, and he factored that into every observation. Sound traveled differently over the hot desert floor. Vehicle engines emitted low-frequency vibrations, discernible only if the observer accounted for air temperature and sand composition. He noted the faint reverberation of a wheeled vehicle on compacted dune surfaces, differentiating it from lighter troop transport. Each data point reinforced his understanding of convoy schedules. By aligning observed cues with expected movement, he could anticipate where each vehicle would be minutes in advance. His mind worked systematically, cataloging patrol behavior, routine checks, stopping points for water and fuel, rotations of escort vehicles. He identified minor anomalies, an additional scout vehicle positioned farther ahead than usual, or a cargo transport moving faster than previous runs. These deviations, though subtle, suggested more than routine operations. It hinted that Allied activity along the coast had caught Axis attention. The convoy was moving in a manner that indicated observation and preemptive adjustment. Hours passed with no need for engagement. The sniper did not act. Observation alone was the first task, and he approached it with archival precision. He recorded every plume, every shadow cast on the dunes, every faint glimmer of metal reflecting sunlight. By mid-afternoon, the unusual speed of a particular convoy caught his focus. Unlike others, it pressed forward with minimal pauses, traversing terrain that normally slowed transport. The heat haze caused it to shimmer and ripple, creating an almost spectral distortion, but he accounted for it, noting exact position and timing. As the sun began its descent, the sniper's attention sharpened further. The distortion of the convoy in the heat haze suggested the presence of a secondary observer, hidden within the landscape, adjusting movements with knowledge of local patterns. He cataloged the anomaly, time, trajectory, number of vehicles, and estimated deviations from expected schedules. This subtle irregularity confirmed his first suspicion. The enemy was not simply moving supplies. They were responding to an unseen influence, anticipating movements along the very desert he now occupied. From his vantage point, he adjusted his position slightly, the coarse sand yielding under his boots, and noted the contours that would provide long-term concealment. The desert was harsh, unforgiving, but it also offered opportunity. Shadows lengthened, wind scoured the sand, and the first faint silhouettes of night approached. The sniper remained motionless, detached, clinical, cataloging every detail with the precision of a field report. In the quiet hum of the desert, he recognized a fundamental truth. The dunes were not empty, and the enemy's awareness of the landscape suggested a game far more complex than simple supply movement. He whispered to himself, almost as a note to his future record, "They know these waters too well." And with that observation, the desert became both a canvas and a trap, and the sniper's work had only just begun. The desert stretched on, a monochrome expanse where heat shimmer made distant dunes appear to ripple like water. The sniper crouched behind a low ridge, eyes narrowed against the stark sunlight reflecting off pale sand. Each wavering line and wavering shadow became data points, tools for calculating the positions and movements of enemy convoys miles away. He understood the deceptive nature of the mirage. Vehicles appeared to float, distances distorted, horizons bending. Yet to him, each illusion carried measurable clues if approached systematically. He observed a distant column of Axis trucks, their tires churning soft sand and leaving ephemeral trails. Through careful focus, he distinguished the true positions from heat-induced distortions. A ripple in the air above the sand created the illusion of a vehicle moving ahead of the convoy, but he noted the delay between the apparent shift and the expected position. By comparing these discrepancies with his previous convoy observations, he estimated both speed and spacing with remarkable accuracy. The shimmer, once a distraction, became a tool for calculation. The sniper timed his notes with the movement of each convoy element. Shadows cast by ridges and boulders shifted slowly, giving him reference points. He recorded the moment exhaust plumes dispersed into the heat haze, noting wind direction and its effect on visual clarity. Each stop, each pause for water or fuel, was cross-checked against prior patterns. Through repetition, he began predicting where vehicles would be minutes in advance. The desert was a vast clock, and he had learned to read its hands with mechanical precision. Concealment remained paramount. He adjusted position along the crest of a dune ridge, ensuring he remained out of sight from both the convoy and any potential scout. Sand whispered faintly under his movements. Even this soft noise was accounted for, as the desert could carry sound far across open terrain. He measured distances using optical triangulation against the nearest outcrops and the slight exaggeration caused by heat shimmer, correcting calculations accordingly. Hours passed, the sun shifting, until a deviation became apparent. A scout vehicle, previously unobserved, appeared at the fringe of the convoy's path. Its presence forced the lead vehicles to alter speed subtly, pausing where they normally would continue. The sniper noted this immediately. The convoy was no longer following predictable schedules. He documented the position of the scout, its distance from the main column, and its effect on timing, understanding that the enemy was probing, potentially aware that their movement was being observed. Every detail fed into his mental map: tire treads in the sand, subtle echoes of metal on soft ground, variations in smoke trail density, even the glint of sunlight on windshield angles. He anticipated the convoy's next positions, calculated ideal vantage points for potential interception, and evaluated terrain for concealment. The desert's distortions were no longer hazards, but measurable variables in a precise calculation. Yet the unexpected scout introduced unease. He adjusted his assumptions, noting that he may not be the only observer. The convoy's irregular pace and the presence of reconnaissance hinted at a hidden element, another mind analyzing the same terrain, possibly countering his own strategies. The realization was subtle but chilling. In the vast, black and white expanse of dunes, he was no longer the sole ghost among shadows. As the sun dipped lower, the sniper cataloged each anomaly with meticulous attention. Mirages danced across the horizon, distorting reality, but he had learned their language. And in that quiet, wavering heat shimmer, he understood the desert's most dangerous secret. Even when unseen, he was being watched. He whispered to himself, a note in his mental ledger: another eyes the dunes. And with that, the desert's mirage became both instrument and warning, preparing him for the unseen contest that lay ahead. The sniper scanned the undulating horizon, eyes tracing the black and white contours of dune and rock. His mission now demanded more than observation. It required a position from which every movement of the enemy convoy could be measured and, when the time came, acted upon. He selected a shallow depression nestled behind an angular rock outcrop, its natural shadow providing concealment against the harsh glare of the North African sun. The curvature of the sand would mask his prone figure from any line of sight, while the rocks broke the outline of his silhouette when observed from afar. He began careful excavation, using a small trowel to create a narrow trench just deep enough to accommodate his body and rifle, while leaving minimal disturbance on the surrounding sand. Every removed grain was spread subtly along the dune's slope, avoiding the creation of unnatural patterns that could betray his presence. The position needed to absorb the rifle's recoil without causing the surrounding sand to shift visibly, and it had to allow a clear line of sight over the distant supply route. Angles were measured meticulously. From the depression, he sighted on the path of the approaching convoys, calculating elevation and compensating for the slight dip in the terrain. Shadows cast by the rocks shifted with the sun, altering the reflective contrast of the sand. The sniper noted these changes in his mental ledger, ensuring his position would remain obscured even as light shifted throughout the morning. Wind posed a constant hazard. Sand could drift and reveal movement, or even interfere with the rifle's mechanical components. He observed the current patterns across the dune ridges, noting gusts and eddies that could scatter fine dust or cause mirage distortions. His camouflage incorporated small sand mounds around his position, carefully sculpted to break the natural lines and shadows, while anchoring light items like spare ammunition and ration tins. Each item was buried or shaded, invisible from the approaches he had calculated earlier. To test the site's effectiveness, he deployed a small decoy, a sand-covered stick with a reflective marker positioned to simulate a scout observing the convoy. From his trench, he watched as the wind shifted the marker slightly, an early indication that natural forces could betray even the most carefully chosen location. He noted how even the subtlest change in wind could alter the apparent silhouette of the position, creating potential risk for exposure. He also conducted a dry run with his own sighting, estimating travel time for bullets at long distances, factoring in heat shimmer and light diffraction. Every calculation was entered into a mental map: angles of fire, probable vehicle speeds, wind gust frequency, and even the impact of shadows cast by ridges. The position was effective, yet unforgiving. An error in timing or an unexpected gust could compromise the operation entirely. Hours passed in silence. The desert remained monochrome, waves of heat and dust curling over angular shadows. As he monitored the horizon, the faint outlines of enemy vehicles appeared sooner than predicted. The convoy's timing had shifted, likely due to reconnaissance or altered schedules. The sniper adjusted his expectations, noting the early approach in his ledger. Every element of preparation, camouflage, position, line of sight, would now be tested under real conditions sooner than anticipated. He whispered to himself, a note of caution and focus: the dunes will not wait. With the first glimpse of approaching wheels, he understood that precision, patience, and adaptability would determine the success of the trap he had so carefully prepared. The sniper adjusted his scope, the blackened metal cool against his gloved hands despite the rising sun. Each movement was calculated, deliberate, measured against the undulating desert backdrop. He aligned the crosshairs with the lead supply vehicle, accounting for the subtle shimmer of heat rising from the sand that distorted visual perception at long distances. The rifle's mechanical click echoed only faintly against the dunes, swallowed by the wide expanse and the whispering wind. Breathing controlled and steady, he gauged wind speed and angle, noting the soft rise of dust along the dune ridges. The convoy moved in its usual pattern, wheels churning sand, exhaust plumes curling above the vehicles in thin gray streams. The sniper traced each vehicle's path, confirming speed and trajectory before committing to his shot. With a slow squeeze of the trigger, the first bullet found its mark, the lead truck jerking violently before grinding to a halt. Silence followed, an unnatural stillness among the rolling dunes. From his concealed trench, he observed soldiers scrambling, shaking the cab of the immobilized vehicle, shouting orders that carried faintly over the distance. He cataloged each movement, noting how troops exited, congregated, and attempted to assess the damage. Every action became part of his mental ledger: number of personnel, their response times, and the formation they re-established as the convoy halted. A second shot was timed precisely. The sniper accounted for the wind gusts and the soft undulations of sand that could alter the bullet's trajectory. The shot hit a secondary support vehicle, forcing it to veer off slightly, adding chaos to the convoy's attempts at reorganization. He maintained a steady observational stance, recording patterns without emotional distraction, noting that vehicles tended to bunch when reacting to sudden stops. Information critical for future ambushes. The sun rose higher, casting stark black and white contrasts across the dunes. Shadows stretched across angular ridges, providing cover for his position while simultaneously revealing subtle movements of enemy personnel. He adjusted his vantage slightly, ensuring that the rifle's line of sight remained unobstructed while remaining hidden from potential observers. His camouflage, sand-dusted fabric, and careful use of depression contours rendered him nearly invisible against the desert's shifting monochrome palette. As the convoy struggled with immobilized vehicles, a secondary convoy appeared on the horizon, approaching at a slightly altered route. The movement had not been predicted in his earlier observations. The vehicles followed a trajectory that, if uncorrected, would bring them dangerously close to his hidden nest. The sniper's analytical mind processed the sudden deviation. He must relocate before his position was compromised, but the trap could not be abandoned without further documentation. He packed the minimal gear quickly, careful not to disturb the surrounding sand or alert the patrols with sudden movement. Each step was calculated, avoiding the line of sight and staying within the shadowed contours of nearby dunes. From the new vantage point, he continued to track the convoy, noting the soldiers' reactions to immobilized trucks, their regrouping efforts, and the patterns emerging from the initial disruption. The unexpected approach of the secondary convoy introduced immediate tension. The sniper's first strike had been a success, confirming both his stealth and skill, but the environment remained unpredictable. He whispered to himself, observing the approaching vehicles through the scope, adapt or be discovered. From his concealed trench atop a dune ridge, the sniper scanned the expanse of sand stretching for miles. He had cataloged the previous convoys in meticulous detail, their departure times, speed, spacing between vehicles, and habitual stops. Today, multiple convoys moved simultaneously, their tires and tracks carving predictable lines across the otherwise featureless desert. He traced each set of tracks through his binoculars, mentally overlaying the intersecting paths to anticipate points of potential vulnerability. The sun rose higher, casting stark shadows along angular ridges and shimmering mirages on distant sand. Heat distortion warped the horizon, demanding constant recalibration of distance and aim. The sniper noted these optical fluctuations, marking where bullets might deviate if fired without adjustment. Wind gusts lifted fine grains, occasionally revealing or masking small undulations, shapes that could betray his position if overlooked. Each environmental factor was calculated: sunlight angle, dune slope, wind velocity, and air density, all folded into a mental grid of potential ambush points. Simultaneous observation of two convoys required shifting focus rapidly. One convoy hugged a shallow wadi, the other crested a higher ridge. He calculated timing windows. The first vehicle of the lower convoy would reach a particular dune depression just as the second convoy's lead truck passed behind a mirage of heat shimmer, creating a fleeting blind spot. These windows, measured in seconds, dictated when shots could be fired with minimal risk of detection. As he adjusted for these variables, subtle irregularities in the second convoy caught his eye. A small vehicle, previously unnoticed, zigzagged slightly off course. The behavior suggested a scouting element, a mobile sniper or observer sent to detect unusual activity. The sniper's pulse remained steady as he analyzed the pattern. The deviation was deliberate, methodical, and clearly reactive. The enemy was aware of potential ambush zones, likely informed by prior engagements. He revisited his mental map, marking probable positions of these scouts. Dune depressions, rock outcrops, and mirages became not only camouflage for himself, but also potential indicators of enemy concealment. He adjusted his positioning, preparing contingency firing lines and escape routes should a sudden counterdetection occur. The desert, harsh and unyielding, became both his ally and adversary, every ripple of sand and shimmer of heat holding tactical significance. Then, from the distant horizon, a movement caught his trained eye. A solitary figure shifted across a dune ridge, its pace and posture subtly mirroring his own observations and adjustments. Every motion, peering, shifting, recalibrating, echoed the same careful deliberation he employed. The presence of another observer was unmistakable, a shadow in black and white that mirrored his methodology and patience. He paused, recording the sight in his mental ledger. The desert held not only his calculated strategies, but now the unknown variable of a mirrored watcher. This new element demanded immediate reassessment of all ambush calculations, forcing him to consider alternate positions and timing. Every convoy, every ridge, and every mirage could now be influenced by this additional observer. In that instant, the sniper recognized the duality of desert warfare. Precision and patience remained paramount, yet unpredictability had crept into the landscape. The mirrored movement in the distant dune was no longer merely an anomaly. It was a harbinger of confrontation, an unseen variable that could either compromise or intensify the effectiveness of his calculated strikes. The horizon disappeared beneath a roiling curtain of sand, a shifting wall of dust and grit that transformed the desert into a monochrome blur. Visibility dropped to mere meters. The distant convoy, moments ago a series of sharp silhouettes, now became formless shadows, their outlines swallowed by the storm. The sniper felt the fine particles scouring his exposed skin, filling the creases of his uniform, and coating his equipment in a thin, abrasive layer. Every movement produced a faint hiss as sand slid across his rifle's metal surfaces. Sound, too, betrayed no direction. Engine growls and tire treads, once precise indicators of distance and speed, were muffled into an indistinct roar. Wind gusts shifted unpredictably, carrying the mechanical echo in one direction before snapping it toward another. He adjusted his stance, crouched low behind a dune ridge, allowing the natural curvature of sand and rock to mask even the smallest silhouette. Each careful shift of his rifle or body had to account for the sudden gusts that could expose a glint of metal or a shadow against the swirling haze. The storm presented both an opportunity and a hazard. He had anticipated covering fire lines, but the storm's intensity demanded improvisation. Using small sand mounds, he constructed crude decoys to simulate movement. Disturbed grains where a prone figure might have shifted, tiny dips in dunes suggesting a hidden rifle, faint trails leading the patrol toward false expectations. The Axis vehicles, already slowed by reduced visibility, followed the general contours of the terrain, unaware that each perceived gap was a carefully crafted illusion. Timing became critical. One armored truck deviated slightly, its engine catching on a loose patch of sand. The movement could expose the broader trap if the driver became suspicious or attempted to correct course abruptly. The sniper recalculated firing lines, mentally noting alternative positions should a sudden flare or reflection betray his exact location. Every adjustment was silent, deliberate, and tethered to the storm's chaotic rhythm. Despite the blinding conditions, he maintained his observation of patrol routines. Tracks left in the soft sand were distorted almost immediately by gusts, erasing signs of movement, but also offering fleeting windows to judge vehicle speed and direction. The sniper relied on micropatterns. The angle of dispersed sand behind tires, faint tremors transmitted through the dune under his body, and the intermittent flash of exhaust against the diffused light of the storm. Each micro-observation reinforced his understanding of the patrol's path and allowed precise manipulation of decoys. Yet the risk was constant. A misstep, a shifting hand, an exposed rifle barrel, or a sudden movement could instantly betray his presence to the vigilant soldiers. The storm's unpredictable gusts had the potential to carry sound, shadows, or even scent toward the convoy, undoing hours of careful planning. He paused between breaths, letting the rhythm of the sandstorm dictate the timing of each minor movement, each adjustment of a decoy mound, each mental note for the eventual strike. In the heart of the storm, he realized that the desert itself had become an ally and an adversary simultaneously. The sandstorm obscured the sniper while also limiting his control over the environment. Yet, within this chaos, he had orchestrated a microcosm of deception, channeling enemy movements into predictable corridors, masking his presence, and establishing a tactical advantage that would be impossible under clear skies. The swirling haze swallowed the convoy entirely, leaving only hints of shadowed shapes. He waited, invisible within the monochrome maelstrom, knowing that one wrong adjustment could unravel his position entirely. Every decoy mound, every subtle manipulation of sand, now bore the weight of life and death. One misstep, one miscalculated gust, and the entire gambit could be compromised. The desert had not yet cleared from the sandstorm's passage. Sheets of dust still drifted across the dunes, moving like pale smoke over the monochrome landscape. The sniper lay motionless within a shallow depression carved earlier into the windward slope. His rifle, wrapped in strips of sand-colored cloth, formed no recognizable silhouette. The muted horizon created a flattened world of gray light, making distance estimation difficult for anyone untrained, an advantage he had cultivated since his arrival. Ahead, the Axis patrol resumed movement with visible hesitation. Officers conferred near a half-buried rock formation, their gestures sharp and uncertain. The convoy had already lost one vehicle days before. Tension radiated from their posture even without sound. Through the shifting haze, the sniper observed their hierarchy, the officer with the field glasses directing the column, and behind him, a small support crew checking maps and supply crates. Both represented critical nodes in the patrol structure. Removing them would destabilize the entire group without alerting them to his precise location. He began the sequence by synchronizing breaths with the rhythm of the wind. Each gust carried grit across the ridge, masking micro-movements and scattering sound. He waited for the officer to face the direction opposite his position, a brief opening that would not repeat. The shot emerged with no more force than a muffled exhale. A single figure collapsed, the surrounding dust absorbing the motion and reducing the fall to an indistinct slump. For several seconds, no one reacted. The storm's residue distorted perception. Shadows shifted unpredictably, and even those closest failed to comprehend what had occurred. The second target moved into position almost by accident, lifting a crate to relocate it deeper into the supply truck. The sniper accounted for the slight angle created by the wind's last gust, adjusting for the upward drift caused by residual heat shimmer now returning to the dunes. When he fired again, the sound vanished within the unsettled air. The man dropped behind the vehicle, out of the line of sight of others, which masked the event even further. Only when another soldier approached did the confusion finally register, though still without direction or certainty. From his vantage point, the sniper recorded their reactions with detached precision. Soldiers scanned the horizon with rifles raised but pointed toward incorrect sectors, misled by the wavering air and drifting sand. Their voices, faint in the wind, carried no coordinated plan. Within minutes, the patrol formed two separate clusters, one circling the fallen officer and the other attempting to secure the supply truck. The sniper tracked their movement patterns, registering reduced morale and a clear fragmentation of command structure. His ledger, mental but exact, would later inform where the convoy weakened and how future strikes might push them into complete disarray. As the desert settled, the psychological effect grew evident. Several soldiers gestured frantically toward multiple directions, convinced the attack came from more than one position. In their minds, no single shooter could remain unseen through two precise strikes. Their misinterpretation provided a new tactical advantage, enemy divisions searching for imaginary threats. Then movement caught his eye, a subtle figure cresting the far dune, carrying reconnaissance equipment. The soldier stopped intermittently, scanning the landscape with deliberate intent. This one moved differently from the rest, slower, more methodical, less distracted by panic. The sniper recognized the posture immediately. This was not a standard patrolman. This was a tracker, dispatched specifically because the patrol no longer believed a lone shooter was responsible. He tightened his grip on the rifle stock, exhaled carefully, and lowered his profile deeper into the sand depression. The reconnaissance soldier was heading directly toward his position. The next shot, if required, would determine whether the myth of the ghost persisted or whether he would be found at last. The first indication that the balance had shifted came not from sight, but from sound, an anomalous snap carried on the dry wind. It was too sharp to be dune erosion and too deliberate to belong to a wandering animal. He paused mid-crawl, cheek against cold sand, and listened. Another report followed, faint, distant, slightly delayed by rolling air. Someone far out in the waste was testing ranges. Not firing at him yet. Searching. Enemy snipers. He slid backward from the ridge line he had been using as a vantage point, keeping his silhouette broken by the uneven crest. Elevation granted vision, but it also made a man a figure against the horizon, an invitation to a trained scope. He pressed low, letting shadows swallow his outline. The battlefield had expanded from the convoys to an invisible duel stretching miles across the flats. A glint flashed to his right. Not sunlight. Glass. He shifted his peripheral focus and traced the shimmer to a thin ridge whose slopes matched the angles he had used days earlier. They had studied his patterns. They were now mimicking them. He counted the seconds between reports. At least 2 shooters. They were coordinating arcs, sweeping wide to triangulate any disturbance. He kept his breath slow, measured, and let the wind fill the gaps between the distant cracks. Each sound told him something. Angle of origin, approximate elevation, and, crucially, discipline. These weren't inexperienced riflemen. They were trained countersnipers. He began a controlled descent from the dune, sliding in silence, using his elbow to guide momentum. Every movement had to be both deliberate and untraceable. He angled toward a lower basin, one he had pre-mapped as an escape corridor for retreating under fire. It had offered cover in earlier sorties, a shallow snaking depression perfect for avoiding long-range sightlines. As he neared the basin, he studied the sand for tracks, both vehicle ruts and boot impressions. The ground told the story the wind hadn't yet erased. Several sets of prints converged near the entrance, then fanned outward across his projected route. A reconnaissance team had already passed through here. They were not guessing. They were following something. He adjusted his vantage again, letting his gaze sweep the horizon. Far beyond the ridges, faint powder clouds rose where vehicles had slowed, likely reconnaissance lorries deploying listening posts or observation teams. His previous ambushes had unsettled them enough to mobilize a wide search net. A muffled thud sounded behind him. Not a rifle shot, something heavier, more muted. Possibly a sniper anchoring a bipod into sand. He froze, then used a reflective pebble fragment to catch a distorted reverse image of the ridge. No movement, but he trusted the intuition built on weeks of desert study. Someone was closing the gap. He crossed to a steeper dune face, one that shifted unpredictably when climbed, perfect for misleading pursuers. He pressed a heel in deliberately, then veered sharply away, sliding sideways down a soft slope. Anyone reading tracks would assume he'd taken the obvious descent, not the lateral plunge. Another rifle report cracked. Closer now. Testing again. Probing. He moved faster, but not recklessly. Every footstep was a calculation. Every shadow a potential shield or betrayal. He reached the lip of the escape basin at last and scanned for the narrow route he had charted on his mental map during calmer days. What he found instead froze him. Fresh tire impressions cut directly across the mouth of the passage, the treads deep and deliberate. A patrol had already driven through. The basin was compromised, no longer an escape corridor, but a choke point. And he was standing at its threshold, fully aware that the hunters were closing in. He advanced through the dunes with deliberate caution, each footfall calculated to minimize sand displacement and reduce visual tracks. The desert's subtle gradients, rolling ridges, rocky outcrops, and narrow wadis, offered natural concealment, yet demanded constant attention. He cataloged the landscape in his mind, noting potential ambush points, observation posts, and misleading depressions suitable for decoy placement. Every dune crest became both a vantage and a risk, revealing him against the pale horizon if misjudged. Small decoys were deployed at measured intervals, sand mounds shaped to resemble crouched soldiers, fragments of equipment partially buried to simulate activity. These minor interventions required precision. He positioned them to catch the peripheral vision of scouts or patrolling convoys, creating false assumptions of presence or absence. Observing from behind a jagged rock face, he recorded which decoys produced glances or course adjustments in passing vehicles. The patterns informed his subsequent movement and strategic placement for larger ambushes. Navigating wadis and dry riverbeds, he avoided linear tracks that might betray his path. Each path choice reflected calculations of visibility, wind direction, and sunlight angle. He paused to observe a distant dust plume, noting the cadence of vehicle engines and the intervals between convoy vehicles. Using these auditory cues, he mapped their acceleration and deceleration, recognizing variations that indicated either reconnaissance scanning or logistical adjustments. He adjusted his position, ensuring he remained outside expected patrol corridors while retaining visual coverage of supply routes. During the approach to a rocky outcrop previously identified as a temporary vantage, he detected subtle deviations in convoy movement. Engine rumble and dust patterns suggested an altered route, one not previously cataloged in his mental maps. The enemy appeared to be experimenting with new patrol pathways, likely in response to earlier ambushes or reports of unusual desert activity. He documented the adjustments meticulously, overlaying them with his prior data to anticipate further variations. Improvisation became critical. He employed micro-adjustments to decoy placement, sometimes shifting sand mounds subtly between vantage checks or repositioning reflective fragments to catch sunlight inconsistently. Each change had to appear accidental to any observer, masking intentional misdirection. The desert's natural contours aided this process. Shadows elongated, dune slopes shifted with the wind, and intermittent rocks created natural blind spots. By midday, he reached a ridge overlooking a narrow channel between two dune clusters. From this position, he could observe two supply routes simultaneously without exposing himself. He monitored engine sounds, heat shimmer over sand, and subtle patterns of dust displacement to estimate convoy speed. Every new measurement was logged mentally, forming a layered understanding of enemy operational patterns. Then he noted it, a convoy moving along a path he had not anticipated. Dust rose along a trajectory outside the previous observational grid, deviating from known patrol corridors. The vehicles maintained strict intervals, suggesting disciplined reconnaissance rather than random wandering. His previous calculations offered no solution for interception along this line, forcing a rapid reassessment of positioning, decoy deployment, and firing angles. The desert, previously predictable in its hostility and uniformity, had revealed a new variable, an uncharted path with the potential to disrupt his ambush strategy. He remained motionless behind the jagged outcrop, scanning for additional signals or reconnaissance elements that might accompany this unexpected movement. The wind shifted, carrying engine vibrations and the faint clatter of metal over sand. The convoy advanced along the unmapped route, a trajectory neither marked in his records nor aligned with earlier enemy patterns. He adjusted his breathing, his mind calculating the necessary steps to maintain concealment, control, and operational advantage. In the shifting monochrome horizon, the unexpected convoy moved steadily forward. His plan would require adaptation and rapid precision to account for this new threat. The desert maze had shifted beneath him, and the first sign of unpredictability now demanded immediate tactical response. He reached the elevated ridge before dawn, when light had not yet revealed the sharp lines of the dunes. The position offered a direct view of the supply corridor that intelligence, pieced together through weeks of observation, indicated as the axis's most vulnerable artery. The convoy scheduled for this route was not a routine one. Its composition, pace, and flanking scouts marked it as a critical supply push intended to stabilize the sector. Crippling, it would achieve more than a tactical disruption. It would fracture cohesion across the front. He lay prone, adjusting the rifle's angle incrementally until the iron alignment matched the faint pre-sun silhouettes. Wind drift was minimal in the early hour, but desert air required constant recalculation. Temperature changes altered density, which in turn shifted point of impact. He measured these variations with habitual precision, performing the mental calculus that had governed each earlier strike. Dust gathered at the ridge's edge, disturbed only by his controlled breaths. The first indication of the convoy's arrival was a subtle tremor in the sand, a vibration that spread through the grains before any sound carried. Soon afterward, he observed the familiar haze of dust rising behind the lead truck. The vehicles approached in a measured sequence: 3 transports, 2 fuel carriers, and a final truck burdened with covered cargo. Their spacing revealed the commander's caution, but also presented predictable stopping intervals. He waited until the second transport entered the narrow funnel between 2 dune walls. A single shot fractured the stillness, striking the engine block with mechanical precision. Smoke curled upward in a soft plume, its black and white form stark against the pale horizon. The truck lurched, halted, and skewed diagonally across the path, exactly as anticipated. The constrained terrain forced the remaining vehicles to slow, presenting new, predictable stopping points. Before the dust from the first impact settled, he fired again. The second shot struck the lead truck's radiator, rendering it immobile. The sudden immobilization created a corridor of trapped vehicles with severely restricted maneuvering options. Desert ambushes depended not on the number of shots fired but on their synchronization, each strike forcing the enemy to halt where they were most vulnerable. As the convoy froze in reactive confusion, soldiers dismounted cautiously, inspecting the horizon with disciplined uncertainty. Mirage distortion and the angled morning light concealed him completely. Even deliberate scanning would reveal only fractured silhouettes of dunes. From his vantage, he documented the responses. One squad forming a perimeter, another checking the disabled engines, a third attempting to establish radio contact. Each movement followed a predictable operational routine, confirming that the origin of the shots remained undetected. He neutralized the fuel carrier next. The impact ruptured the tank but did not ignite it. Precision ensured minimal smoke, preventing rapid triangulation of the shot's direction. The damaged carrier forced another halt, compressing the convoy into a tight, immobile cluster. Morale faltered swiftly. Soldiers crouched behind tires and cargo, scanning the silent horizon. Dust drifted around them in slow spirals, the monochrome scene resembling an archival photograph suspended between moments. No one fired blindly. Fear of revealing their position ensured hesitation. The enemy understood only that the attack was exact, unseen, and overwhelmingly calculated. Then he heard it, distant engines, approaching at a pace far faster than standard support intervals. Reinforcements. Their trajectory indicated direct movement toward the ambush zone, suggesting a rapid response triggered by earlier convoy deviations. He checked the horizon. Dust rising at 2 points confirmed the risk, a flanking maneuver forming on both sides. He exhaled slowly, recognizing the shift in dynamics. Remaining in position would result in entrapment. The encirclement lines were forming too quickly. His window for extraction was narrowing with each approaching engine. The ambush had succeeded, but survival demanded immediate disappearance into the shifting dunes. As the first reinforcement vehicles crested a distant ridge, he eased backward from the firing nest, his outline consumed by the monochrome landscape. The hunt had reversed, and the desert's long shadows warned that escape would require as much precision as the ambush itself. The ridge that had served as his final firing nest now appeared indistinguishable from the surrounding dunes, an eroded contour softened by wind, devoid of any trace that a human presence had ever occupied it. He began his withdrawal the moment reinforcement engines reached audible range. Movement was deliberate, measured, and synchronized with the shifting gusts, allowing each step to fall as the sand was already in motion. The desert, when understood properly, concealed without effort. One needed only to move with its rhythm rather than against it. He advanced along the leeward side of a dune, where wind patterns naturally collected thin drifts of loose sand. Each footfall sank and then refilled instantly, leaving no definable imprint. For the portions where the ground hardened into compacted clay or stony crust, he adjusted his route to avoid revealing directional cues. Distance was less important than invisibility. Whenever necessary, he used a short brush made from bundled desert grass to obscure minor disturbances before the wind completed the task. Behind him, faint echoes of shouted orders drifted across the dunes. The convoy zone had erupted into a patchwork of frantic activity, soldiers examining disabled vehicles, others forming scattered search groups radiating outward in uncertain patterns. From a concealed vantage between two converging dune crests, he paused to observe. Their confusion was evident in the irregular spacing of patrol clusters. Some fanned out in wide arcs. Others remained fixed near the damaged trucks, as if uncertain whether advancing farther would expose them to additional fire. He noted their attempts at misdirection, whether deliberate or accidental. A small group advanced toward an unrelated ridge, marking it with colored flags as if trying to anchor assumptions to visible terrain. Another team inspected a shallow depression, searching for footprints that did not exist. Their reliance on fixed procedures left them vulnerable to false leads, and the expansive landscape magnified doubt. It was not the damage to vehicles that unsettled them, It was the absence of a detectable origin, a strike without a signature. When the reinforcements arrived, their movement revealed the commander's shifting theory. The vehicle split into two flanking lines, advancing in wide parallel arcs rather than in a single direction. This suggested uncertainty, a belief that multiple snipers had operated simultaneously from dispersed positions. The earlier dual-target ambushes had reinforced this idea. Today's precision had solidified it. He moved again, adjusting his direction by reading the faint gradient differences across the dunes. The horizon shimmered with a wavering mirage that flattened distances, but he had learned to navigate using the more reliable cues, subtle color transitions between compact sand and looser drift, the angle of small rock fragments exposed to light, and the slight darkening that indicated wind-sheltered sand pockets. Each sign allowed him to slip deeper into the maze of dunes without deviating from his planned escape arc. At a dry wadi, he descended slowly, ensuring the sloped walls would not cascade behind him. The wadi offered temporary concealment, but he avoided traveling through it entirely. Such channels created linear paths that could be interpreted by trackers. Instead, he crossed it at an angle and continued on higher ground where visibility improved and acoustic detection decreased. The sound of engines gradually faded. Patrol shouts became indistinct, then disappeared entirely beneath the low hum of wind brushing across the dune ridges. By late afternoon, he reached an elevated crest that allowed a final look back toward the ambush site. In the distance, scattered soldiers still searched in conflicting directions. Their formations lacked coherence, as if each group followed its own theory of the attack. He recognized the psychological impact of their uncertainty. Doubt introduced inefficiency far more effectively than any single strike. It disrupted schedules, delayed supply lines, and fractured confidence. Whether they credited one sniper or several, the result was the same. Unpredictability had become their primary adversary.